Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Student Impact Report, brought to you by the Student Basic Needs Coalition. I'm Taylor Allgood, joining you from Washington, D.C.
And I'm Mindjanae Taylor, co-hosting from Sacramento, California.
So, for new listeners joining us this week, the Student Impact Report is a podcast where student leadership meets real-world impact.
Each episode dives into the latest news affecting students and shares the stories of student leaders driving change on their campuses and beyond.
So, for our new listeners this week, we launched our first episode ever last week, Tuesday, February 18th. So, if you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, please do so. We covered topics like AI, recent immigration policy changes, and we also had a very insightful conversation with ASI President and CEO at Sacramento State, Natalie Andrade Dominguez.
For more information and to listen on YouTube or Spotify, visit studentbasicneeds.com/podcast for links to our show. For today's episode, we'll be covering some of the top higher ed news of our choice this week. Additionally, we'll have an open discussion on DEI and exclusive interview with Jaleah Taylor, student body president at the University of North Carolina. Stick around to hear us discuss the experience of Black student leadership and policies affecting DEI in higher education.
So I know that each week, Maya and I, we both look up some different news that's affecting higher education for the week, and we hope to bring that to every episode in the very beginning just to broadly overview what's kind of going on, what the landscape is looking like before we dive into topic deep dive or our interview with the student leader of the week. So yeah, let's just take some time and discuss what we found for this week.
Cool. So this first one's a pretty big one. It's fairly recent. The Trump administration has ordered schools to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, DEI, within 14 days, or they risk losing federal funding. This mandate, announced by the Department of Education, targets practices that differentiate based on race in areas such as admissions, financial aid, and hiring. This action is a part of a broader trend with Republican lawmakers proposing approximately 50 bills across 20 states to restrict DEI initiatives in education and other sectors. Such measures threaten to reverse progress made toward inclusivity and equity, posing just a general challenge to the values of diversity and open discourse in the classroom. And the question I kind of have to present from this is, how will public institutions move forward now that finances are on the line? And obviously, if you're a student, this could apply to your school in different ways. So it's just something to think about going forward.
I think one of the biggest scares or concerns I have right now is how they're defining everything as DEI, and that's incredibly scary because what is that going to mean if, professors aren't able to mention alternative perspectives in their teaching, or if they even mention a different type of theory or something that doesn't align with the normative perspective on things. Like, I can just see now, like, all of these cases of, oh, this was DEI or this was DEI, and it's like, it's scaring me.
Yeah.
Last week, the day before Valentine's Day, actually last Thursday, February 13th, Florida lawmakers voted and confirmed to eliminate in-state tuition for undocumented students, and that was signed off immediately by Governor Ron DeSantis. And this repeals the 2014 bipartisan law that did allow undocumented students to pay in-state tuition for their education if they met certain residency and schooling requirements. But now that this is no longer, it's going to have just a disastrous impact on students and their investment in their education. This is signaling possibly a potential trend, unfortunately. Other states, including Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Texas, are considering similar bills. So we're going to keep a lookout for more updates regarding that. But, it's just scary to think about. In-state tuition has been very instrumental for many undocumented students because of the fact that they can't access federal aid. Advocates for undocumented students warn that this will create major financial barriers, and we know this. and create even further barriers to accessing higher education for many in our country. Like I mentioned, this could set the precedent for other states to test the waters and, in line with some other, anti-immigration policies that have been rapidly pushed out. This is just one of many policy pushes that we're seeing, unfortunately, that are aligning with this broader anti-immigration agenda.
Yeah. I think it's like especially kind of maybe not scary. I don't know if scary is the word, but like kind of a pattern through all the articles we're talking about today is that like how different states are interpreting like administrative policy and decisions. So one of the states that we want to highlight next is Ohio. I know last week you mentioned Ohio Senate. Just a reminder if you didn't hear that article from last week. Just last week, Ohio Senate passed Senate Bill 1, which would ban diversity and inclusion efforts, prevent faculty from striking, set rules around classroom discussion, put diversity scholarships at risk, and much more consequences beyond that. But kind of following up on that, kind of hearing voices of students and how they're feeling about it, and like speaking to one of the 800 students who wrote the testimony against that bill last week. A lot of students are expressing the intention to leave the state if the bill becomes law once it gets to the House. Some fear that it will undermine support systems for marginalized groups and stifle just academic freedom in general. One of those students from that article from the Ohio Capital Journal, if I'm correct, is Sabrina Estevez, which is a second-year student at Ohio State University. In a quote to them, she said, "Had Senate Bill 1 been in effect when I was choosing the appropriate higher education route for myself, leaving the state of Ohio would have been priority one." She went on to say the merit of a degree from the state of Ohio is significantly eroded if this bill passes. So that's kind of a sentiment a lot of students are sharing. But what Ohio students kind of wait for now is that the bill just needs to be passed by Ohio House. If it will get passed, it would receive the governor's signature to become law. It could get vetoed by the governor, and in that case, lawmakers would have to make a 3-5 vote from each chamber to override that. But for right now, a lot of Ohio students feel like in limbo state of just waiting until a decision is made. But yeah, I can really understand how like tense it can feel for a lot of Ohio students and just Ohio citizens in general.
Yeah, I mean, this one obviously hits home. As I was born and raised in Ohio, went to college in Ohio, received 2 degrees from the University of Cincinnati, and I've been kind of following this story for personal reasons. I've seen, personal connections of mine on LinkedIn posting about how they provided testimony as well, and the bill still went through that round despite the hundreds of testimonies from students, staff, and other stakeholders. And I'm thinking just of my own experience too. I benefited from these programs going to school. I chose to go to the University of Cincinnati as opposed to going to an out-of-state school because of the fact that I was able to receive the Darwin T. Turner Scholarship, which is a scholarship that serves historically marginalized communities. If I
Yeah.
didn't receive that scholarship, I would not have gone to school in Ohio either. And I hope that Governor DeWine has the sense in him to know what's best for all Ohioans and to veto this because, he has in the past, made some decisions that I think are in the best interest of people, despite, me not aligning with his views, political views 100%. I do think that sometimes he has been able to, mend the aisle, so to speak, and really like make a decision that really benefits everyone, regardless of political affiliation. So I hope this case is no different. I hope that he can really stand for what's right and understand the tremendous impact that this will have on Ohio economy too. Let's talk about how many people will not go to college and how many universities and colleges in the state will be impacted financially if this goes into effect. And it's going to create a ripple effect that I don't think any of these lawmakers that are in favor of this are anticipating.
Yeah, you're right.
Um, However, we like to highlight some good news going on. And I know that we've highlighted a few of the major rollbacks kind of going on right now, but there are still some positive movements in the realm of DEI and higher education, and we want to leave it on this note. In the state of Virginia, particularly very close to me, they are considering more funding for college food pantries. So I'm incredibly excited about this as, somebody who works in food systems and food security work, particularly in higher education. This is another story that I am really going to keep an eye out for, and I hope it really does go into effect. Virginia lawmakers are considering adding a $500,000 budget proposal to support food pantries and other like food systems work on college campuses. And this would help to sustain campus food pantries and provide consistent access to food for students experiencing long-term or short-term hunger and food insecurity. Currently, the model that most food pantries on college campuses go with right now would be a donation model. They rely on private donations and other external sources of funding, mainly for operations, leading to inconsistent resources and, not a very stable promise of funding for future years and the sustainability of some of these programs. But, advocates in Virginia are urging for Governor Glenn Youngkin to approve the funding to combat this very important issue. So just to kind of zoom out then and look at the bigger picture of this, other states are, grappling with the same issue right now. Food insecurity among college students is a rising trend across the country. And so, if Virginia approves this funding, it could create a positive ripple effect or set a positive precedent for other states to follow suit and really invest in these food efforts at the state level. There has been a long-standing debate, I think, among states, institutions, and private donors regarding who should be responsible for these initiatives and ensuring the food security of college and university students. But I think this would be a really positive step if the state of Virginia decides to go through with this. So more developments to come on that, but all in all, we know that a well-supported food pantry system at any college or university, Virginia or otherwise, leads to, overall better student outcomes and better student college completion rates, right? And that's what we want. We want, more students completing college, getting jobs in their fields, returning that investment into the economy. And so if everything comes down to money at the end of the day, there's the argument there. By investing in these students and their security, it will all, benefit everyone in the long run.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of speak to like, at least at my campus, like I kind of relied on the food pantry since my freshman year. So that's like a resource I'm always looking for. But yeah, I mean, any program at any school could be at risk of losing funding or not getting that funding, or they may not have it right now. So yeah, it's really good to hear that Virginia would be considering kind of providing such as like a stable resource for students on campus, or supporting that resource.
I don't think I mentioned this also. One other thing is that this policy advocacy, essentially it's called the Hunger-Free Campus Bill, that is being pushed out across many different states. Some states, including Maryland, I think, where I'm actually living technically, I think they've passed some hunger-free campus legislation, which was originally drafted by the organization called Swipe Out Hunger, which American University, my old university, UC, they're actually partners of Swipe Out Hunger. And so I saw in the article that I was reading about this too, that, they had students in the courtroom like holding up the signs with the Swipe Out Hunger logo. So it's really cool to see them as well leading this effort on the national stage. And yeah, I know that the hunger-free campus legislation is currently focused in prioritizing public schools, but I would also really love to see more developments with this policy in the future to also include, if there's a way to team up with some private institutions as well. I know where I work right now, AU is a private institution, and so I'm like, I would love to see how this policy could also, help us make the case for our institution to invest in our campus food pantry as well. Yeah, I mean, I think any news like highlighting this is bringing more positive attention to this, and so all I can really hope is that more universities and colleges will follow suit, budget allowing.
Yeah. Oh, you can learn more at the studentbasicneeds.com as well.
Check out studentbasicneeds.com for more information.
Subtle plug, yeah. Okay. So these policy shifts, from cutting DEI programs to limiting access to in-state tuition to addressing college food insecurity, paint a clear picture of how student support structures are changing across the country. whether it's financial aid, campus resources, or institutional commitments to equity. We're seeing a trend where the very systems designed to level the playing field for students are being dismantled.
And one of the biggest and most controversial pieces of this puzzle that we've seen is the rollback of DEI initiatives. There's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding out there about what DEI actually means in higher education, how it functions, who it serves. And so let's break it down and just like talk about our thoughts about what does DEI truly look like in a higher education setting and why we think it's under attack now more than ever.
I think a good place to start is to start discussing some common misconceptions about DEI. We want to start discussing about DEI being about exclusion rather than inclusion. I think a lot of people think that groups that like support minority groups on campus are inherently there to like make them feel inferior in some way. But really, it's just to broaden the experience of these marginalized groups and make the campus a comfortable place to be and to learn and to just exist in general. Um, but yeah, I think it's a really frustrating kind of misconception to hear.
Exactly. And that piece about the argument that like DEI is actually exclusionary is, I don't know. I feel like it's in part promoted as that idea by a lot of different people in groups because
Mhm.
ultimately they're seeing it come down only to the factor of race, which I think is another common misconception about DEI is that it all comes down to race when we know that DEI, equity, inclusion, there's so much more that goes into that. Even that food security conversation we had about, food pantries on campus being invested in, that's about, income, access,
Yeah.
students from all different backgrounds, even at the university I work at, where, we have our campus food pantry. Every student has access to that, no matter their financial background, their race, gender. Like, it's part of the inclusionary piece of
Yeah.
DEI that these resources are for people who need them. And so making it about race in that sense really does shadow a lot of important pieces of DEI as well, such as like accessibility. UC, where I went to college, was a very hilly campus. It was very hard to navigate. And so for folks with disabilities or who had to get around via wheelchair or other means, it was very hard to navigate. And so UC implementing different ramps and elevators, accessibility
Yeah.
procedures, and things like that all goes into DEI, but I think it's so overlooked because there's such this buzz around people thinking that certain groups are getting this advantage when they're not deserving it, when really that is not the case.
Yeah. I think like it's frustrating because I know last week we kind of mentioned how like West Point Military Academy they got rid of like a lot of their clubs on campus, which is really hard for me because like my campus like the fact that we can have clubs like Caribbean Student Association and Lavender Alliance and Diverse Women in Political Science, like for me, a lot of those clubs are a way for me to just kind of like meet people and just like make friends and network and kind of people who are in my special interest or in my cultural background, not necessarily just that, but like the fact that we can have those clubs is like a benefit to campus. So the fact that some schools are like getting rid of those programs and kind of like stifling their students in that way is really frustrating. So I feel like a lot of those programs and events they put on just give them a chance to express themselves too. Just have a space outside of the educational realm, just kind of feel comfortable at the institution. So I think that part of it's really frustrating.
This very much feels targeted, and it feels like many people who have fought so hard to create just and equitable environments for people, especially on college campuses, like all of this work is just being stomped on by this administration, and it just feels so targeted and unfair. And I really hope that there's no constitutional standing to this and that student groups and advocates, allies, other stakeholders will be able to continue to speak and express freely.
Yeah. I mean, the implication that marginalized groups just existing on campus is radical or wasteful is just in itself really reductive. And like that in itself will just create a mindset that marginalized groups can't speak for themselves and just like be in spaces that are for joy or are for education or whatever they want it to be for. Um, yeah, it's really frustrating. If you want to learn more about DEI, I really encourage you all to check out your own university's DEI office and multicultural centers, along with any student advocacy groups to stay updated, any policy impacts at your personal school level, whether it be a public university or the big community college or a high school. Just stay informed in that way if you want to learn more.
We're all kind of learning about these changes as they go. Like, we don't have very solidified answers currently as it stands, but I think the most important thing right now is just to continue to support, uplift each other, to find those moments of community, and really share as you learn. You know, we are not experts on this subject and don't claim to be, but we find it really important to share what we are learning along the way with viewers and other people who are interested. And that's just one way that we're trying to maintain the sense of community, help each other out, to stay informed, to use our voice, and yeah, just make sure that everyone feels aware of, you know, what could happen. But before it gets to that point, we do have the tools and the resources to mobilize and to stand with each other.
Yeah. Kind of going forward for staying informed, it's really important, even if for a student like me who lives in California, where policies like these seem like they don't really affect us much, it's still just as important to support the centers that you have at your schools, and learn more and stay informed about the offices at your schools, especially if you're in a state like California, which seems more separate from the administrative policies, but that's not the case though, because anything could happen to our schools and any funding could be pulled or any changes could be made from the university level. So I just want to set that reminder out for any states like mine, or any students like me.
Thank you. So stay tuned because coming up next, we're sitting down with Jaleah Taylor, student body president at the University of North Carolina, to get her perspective on these policy changes and their impact. Plus, in honor of Black History Month, and yes, we are still celebrating, we are celebrating the power and excellence of Black student leadership. So you won't want to miss the conversation. Stay tuned. All right, so we have covered a lot today, including recent DEI rollbacks and what they mean for students, institutions, and the future of higher education. But we like to remind everyone that policy changes don't happen in a vacuum, and it's often the students, including their voices, their leadership, and their resiliency, that continue to push back and advocate for real policy change. So to dive deeper into this conversation, I'm excited to introduce our next guest, Jaleah Taylor, student body president and our student body president at the University of North Carolina. Welcome.
Thank you for having
Hi.
me.
Yeah, of course. So, Jaleah Taylor is a senior from Charlotte, North Carolina, studying political science and media and journalism with a focus on advertising and public relations. She is an honors Poe scholar and is the co-founder of the Black Pre-Law Student Association. Outside of her role as student body president, Jaleah has served as an Agora Fellow and DEI Fellow. Jaleah's passion lies in helping people and ensuring the door is open wider for those who come after her. It's great to have you.
So great to be with you today, Taylor.
Yeah, awesome. So let's get into it. I know earlier in this episode, Maya and I were talking a lot about some recent DEI policy rollbacks and what that could mean for the future of higher education. And so, you know, as student body president, you have a front row seat in seeing how these DEI policies really do impact students in real time. So from your perspective, how have these recent proposed DEI rollbacks affected the campus climate at UNC? Have you seen or heard anything from students or administration about this?
Definitely. And I would like to say that even before some of these executive orders came out, removing diversity, equity, inclusion from practically any place, unfortunately, North Carolina was one of the states that was already on this track. UNC was one of the schools in the affirmative action case. So we were one of the schools that were a part of the removal of affirmative action and kind of setting that precedent around the country. So we first experienced the effects of that not too long after that decision was passed. Our admissions office was really tasked and had to work tirelessly to ensure that, you know, all students of different backgrounds were coming into Carolina. But unfortunately, with that decision, we did see a decrease in the amount of Black students that were accepted and enrolled at UNC. So that was something that we could physically see on campus. Every year, our Black Student Movement, which is the group on campus that serves as like a coalition of Black students, and they work to advocate for different things. they host a Black student convocation for the first year students, and they invite different student leaders to come and speak about their experience being Black at Carolina. And so I came and spoke at that conference, or that at that convocation, and it was mind blowing seeing like visibly how less Black students were on campus. The year before, I had also came to that convocation, and the room was packed, and the next year it was not packed anymore. So you talk about, while affirmative action and DEI are two different things, it's very much connected, and seeing that in person was very unfortunate. And then later, in that year, the Board of Governors, who kind of manages the whole North Carolina school system, they decided to remove diversity, equity, inclusion from all of our policies at UNC. And so this was definitely something that students were not a fan of. We know that diversity, equity, inclusion impacts everyone. It helps everyone, no matter if you're from a minority community or not. And so there's things on campus like our literal diversity, equity, inclusion office who, helped not only with minority and ethnic problems on campus, but also helped with like interfaith religion sort of practices. So it's affecting everyone. Students are they don't know what's next. I mean, we see something like affirmative action get taken away, and then we see diversity, equity, inclusion come down the line, and it's like, where is the limit to this? Are they gonna attack our Black student movement on campus? Are they gonna come for other cultural centers on our campus? And so students are definitely very alarmed for that. And then for unfortunately, the new federal administration to come in and kind of just double down on that and say, hey, we do not approve of diversity, equity, inclusion. It's mind blowing, and it's caused a lot of stress for students on campus.
Yeah, I can only imagine. We were talking about that earlier this episode, actually, about how the word DEI is, in and of itself is being weaponized, and there's really such an unclear understanding of what is DEI as a topic now. And it's like, is that going to, or how is that going to impact freedom of expression and the ability for students and different groups and communities to find a sense of belonging on campus? Just a follow up to that, I'm curious, like, how have students been able to, push through and find community in that sense of belonging despite what's been happening at your institution and on the federal level?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the only time where diversity has been under attack. We've, unfortunately, in Carolina's history, had multiple times in which, students have had to kind of come together and advocate. And I think that's what students have been doing. We've had so many different student organizations who've came to our state legislator offices to advocate. And personally, I have worked with administrators in the chancellor's office as well as other, elected officials to advocate for DEI or at least some aspects of it. And so that's kind of what we've done, and just like leaning on each other and knowing that diversity, equity, inclusion came to UNC in 2019, and it was here for 5 years. And just as fast as it left us, it can come back. And so I think students being hopeful and like really putting their time and energy into going to the polls and voting so that we can get the people who control our board of governors, get people that recognize that DEI is important in office so that that can come back to our school. I think that's how students have been feeling and trying to channel their energy into something good.
Absolutely. I know that one major misconception about DEI is that it only benefits certain groups or marginalized populations. So, based on your experience, what would you say to those who may not fully understand the purpose of DEI initiatives and what that can do for students in higher education?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, DEI, when you break it down, diversity is a great thing to have in the classroom. When you have a diverse group of students from different backgrounds and experiences, you're better to have better conversations and interpret history, media, politics, whatever it may be, science, differently, and kind of come to better solutions. And then when you talk about equity, that's something as simple as making sure that everyone's on the same playing field. I want to be able to actively contribute to the classroom just as much as you're able to. And I don't want to have any barriers that prevent me from being able to do that. And then you talk about inclusion. That's pretty simple. How do we make sure that everyone feels like they have a voice and that they're included? So when you break down those three words, I think that's something that a lot of people can get behind. But when, like you mentioned earlier, when we put them together, it suddenly becomes something that is weaponized. And so I think, like, in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, it helps everyone. For instance, on our campus, I launched a meal swipe donation plan, and we've kind of worked hard this past year to get that instated. And we did a survey on campus, and we found that even students that were not facing food insecurity on campus were willing to support this plan. And so that just shows that even people who might necessarily not be impacted by, DEI or, certain policies are impacted because they want to see their other students around them succeed. And so I think that's a very important element to have when you're kind of talking about DEI, just making it clear that it helps everyone.
I love everything that you mentioned, and that brings up, I know you weren't here for the earlier portion of the episode, but we were talking about exactly that, right? How DEI has somehow become somewhat like synonymous with just like the focus on race. And there are so many other like aspects too of DEI that do make it beneficial for everyone and our society ultimately. And some examples we also were talking about were like, yeah, like campus food pantries. That goes across race, across gender, across ability, all of these different things that are generally not always considered in, normative society. And so some of these things on campus have, been around for so long that people don't even see them as part of DEI, but the accessibility ramps that you see around campus and all of these things are a part of the larger DEI scope that I think a lot of like people now, as they're talking about it, and it's such like a buzzing topic now, it's all coming down to race and that focus, but there's just so much more that goes into that. And you kind of touched on this too, but we know that students are often the ones leading the charge when it comes to pushing back against harmful policies, whether it be on campus or in our greater communities. So can you just talk a little bit more specifically about how UNC students have been organizing and responding to some of these DEI attacks?
Definitely. I mean, students have just been speaking out, and that's the powerful tool of social media. A lot of different student organizations, across our campus have written statements and sent them to administrators, sent them to our chancellor, and telling them how they feel. And sometimes it doesn't go anywhere, but a lot of times it does go somewhere, and it ends up in the hands of an administrator. And fortunately, with the help of student government and other pressures, we're kind of able to say, hey, let's have a conversation about this. This is something that has been going on and a student has this perspective. Like, can we talk about this? And I think one really good example of that last year, there's been lots of students that have been really concerned about the genocide going on in Gaza and, the implications of that and how that impacts students on campus. And particularly our Palestinian and Arab students were really, really concerned and honestly frustrated with, their grievances kind of not being acknowledged by the university. And so I see that as an element of diversity, equity, inclusion. We can't only highlight one group that has faced a catastrophe. We have to highlight other groups on campus or other groups of people that have, faced these terrible events too. And so what we as student government tried to do is to get these students into the rooms of administrators, let them discuss how certain statements went out from the university made them feel. And so that's kind of how we've been channeling our advocacy, just like making students feel like they're heard and they're included. And it really does go a long way when students feel like they're supported by their university.
Absolutely. I want to switch gears kind of. I mean, it's still related, of course, but despite the administration change and despite these recent rollbacks on DEI policy across the board, we are still proudly celebrating Black History Month. And, you're leading as student body president at a time when higher education is facing and experiencing some major shifts. So as a Black woman in leadership, that comes with its own set of challenges. So How has your identity informed your leadership approach, especially on a college campus like UNC?
Yeah, well, UNC is a predominantly white institution, and so a lot of these spaces that I enter in are white, particularly the Board of Trustees at UNC. I'm the only Black woman on that board, and so my identity is something that I'm definitely aware of in every space that I think of. But I think I feel still so supported in those spaces because I know I have my community of students and even the different administrators that are of color that work at UNC. I always lean on them for advice and support. And I also go into these spaces knowing that, despite our differences, there are commonalities. And I think, making an effort to really have conversation and good dialogue with these people that may, not look like me, and may not think like me, but just having conversations. I know it's like kind of like a basic concept that we always think about, like, oh, just, talk to thy neighbor and, maybe you can find some solutions. But that's really kind of how I've approached my advocacy work. So, yes, being a Black woman is definitely something that I'm constantly aware of, but knowing that, despite our differences, we can still have conversation and still come together and advocate for the things that are important for students. And then, too, also, all the three of the student body presidents that came before me were also Black student leaders. So,
Awesome.
hearing about their experiences, the way that they advocated in a room full of people who did not look like them was definitely something that was really empowering for me. And then reaching out to the alumni network who were Black student leaders on campus before I came here as well, has been, very helpful because they've faced some of the same issues that UNC currently faces now. Even in the 90s, there was like a lot of struggle to get Black student representation, and then in the 70s and the same thing. So hearing about these different experiences helps me be more aware and honestly feel more empowered when I enter these spaces.
Absolutely. I resonate with that 100%. And kind of going along with that, during this time, during Black History Month, and really all throughout the year, we should be acknowledging the legacy of many Black trailblazers. But are there any leaders for you, past or present, who have particularly inspired you in your own leadership journey?
Definitely. I would say that two of the leaders that I really look up to a lot are one, Monica Cloud. She is a former like Speaker of the Senate at UNC, and she graduated, I think, in '99. And then also a former student body president, Raina Walters Morgan, who graduated in '99, who's actually just been elected the DNC vice chair of civic engagement. Those are both
Awesome.
two Black women that I really look up to and admire. They were able to do so much for our campus. The former student body president, Rainer Walters Morgan, is actually one of the leaders that brought a voting site to campus. And so I think
Wow.
about like how she was able to do that on campus in the 90s, and then where she's at now at the DNC, kind of still working to make sure that voter engagement and people have all the resources and access to voting is something still so inspiring for me. And I just think of like all the Black women that are often leading the efforts to get people to the polls and making sure that everyone is supported. So yeah, those are just like two leaders that I really look up to. I also really look up to my mom a lot,
Yeah.
another Black woman. So, and who is also a Carolina alum, who's just like instilled in me to feel empowered any space that I go, and always gives me great confidence, because she has great confidence in herself. So, yeah, those are, I guess, three people that I really admire in their leadership.
Oh, I love that. I mean, this whole interview has been great, so thank you so much. But I do want to leave off on one question. I think, this is a new experience for me getting to speak with so many different student leaders from across the country. And so it's just so fascinating, like hearing all the different work being done on each campus. So I guess I'm just curious to know, like, what are some upcoming projects or initiatives that you have coming up at your university that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, definitely. So the first one I kind of alluded to already, but for years, students have really wanted to have the ability to donate their swipes lots of students come in and they get meal swipes, they get these large meal plans, but they don't end up actually using all their swipes and they just go to waste at the end of each semester. And at the same time, we know that students on campus, unfortunately, are struggling with or facing food insecurity. So we have just spent our time advocating this whole year and have presented to our board of trustees and received lots of support from them. And so next year we'll be moving forward with a meal swipe donation plan so that students can donate their swipes to other students in need. And then another initiative that we've been working on is an interfaith center. There's so many groups on campus who fortunately do have the space to practice faith. But unfortunately, some other groups, such as our Muslim Student Association, doesn't really have that space on campus to practice. And so we see bringing an interfaith center as more of a way to open up doors so that students can practice their faith and their religion and not have to go through any barriers or challenges with preserving space on campus. And so that's something that we're continuing to advocate for and that we hope we can get lots of support in the next couple of weeks. But I don't know, it's been a really exciting time in this term. And even though I won't physically see these projects when I'm still in office, it'll be nice, leaving Carolina, because I'll be graduating this May, and seeing them come to campus next year, even after I'm gone. So yeah, those are just two.
That's awesome. Well, best of luck to you and all your future endeavors post-graduation. I know this semester, your last semester of school, goes by so fast, so just soak it in while you can. And yeah, I just want to say, Jaleah, thank you so much again for your insights, your experience, and for sharing your leadership with us. It's just been really insightful today. And, I've never been to UNC before. I've never seen the campus or anything like that. So I feel like I have a little bit more knowledge about the landscape there and what's going on over there. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the example you're setting for so many students across the country, especially Black student leaders. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Taylor. It's been a great opportunity to get to know and talk to you a little bit more.
So as we close out today's episode, we want to leave you with this. Policies may change, but the fight for equity in education is not going anywhere. Students have been at the forefront of change, and as we've seen today, the legacy does live on. Whether it's pushing back against harmful policies, advocating for inclusive campuses, or stepping into leadership roles, we want to remind you that your voice as a student and as a leader does matter. If today's conversation resonated with you, don't stop here. Stay informed, get involved, and find ways to support the leaders and movements working to protect and expand education for all students. And with that, we're wrapping up this week's episode of the Student Impact Report. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify and YouTube so that you don't miss an episode. And we'll be back next time with more conversations that matter. Until then, take care, stay engaged, and don't stop making an impact.